If you sit still long enough in our town the week before Christmas, you can hear the year finishing its sentence. Snow hushes the streets. The trains soften their voices as they pass the river bend. And somewhere across the square, a wreath squeaks on a door hinge that ought to have been oiled in October. I have always liked that sound. It reminds me that nothing perfect stays perfect, which is to say, it remains honest. You will never mistake this place for a postcard if you listen with your eyes closed. My name is Jonathan. I am 68 years old, and the tools I inherited from my father still hang over my workbench like old friends at a diner booth. That bench faces a window looking out at Sycamore Street, where the blue door of my house leans a fraction to the left when the temperature drops and pretends it doesn't need a new coat of paint. I tell myself I'll get to it in spring. I said that last spring too. There are always other things to sand, other edges to soften, other cuts to make clean so nobody gets a splinter where kindness is meant to rest. If you ask people in town what I do, they'll say I'm a carpenter. But that's not exactly it. I fix what keeps families warm enough to forgive one another for ordinary hurts. I coax a boiler back to life at midnight, replace a stair tread before a toddler learns to climb, shave a swollen door so a teenager can slam it and feel heard. The money is steady in a slow, middle-aged kind of way. The gratitude is quiet. I don't need the other kinds. My wife, Elaine, used to call my workshop the chapel because I swept it every night like a man preparing for prayer. There is a radio on the shelf that only half obeys the stations, a coil of extension cord that will never untangle in my lifetime, and a jar of screws that came from jobs so old I can't remember which houses they've already seen. When the first snow arrives, all of it takes on the warm smell of pine and lemon oil and something else I never could name, but that made Elaine say this is what safety smells like. She has been gone for years now, and I still catch that scent sometimes, as if it sits at the edge of the room and waits for me to turn. I became a grandfather before I learned how to stop reaching for her hand in the middle of a sentence. I am not ashamed of that. Love does not leave because you cleaned out a closet. It simply changes where it waits for you. When my first grandson, Ethan, was born, the doctor placed him in my arms, and I felt the universe lean in to see whether I would wobble. I did. I cried down his hair and apologized for it, and then laughed because apologies never held such weightlessness. 2 years later, Mia arrived with a stare that measured the room, and then Ava surprised us all with the kind of smile that makes you want to gather wood for a fire that will not go out. Those children taught me there are seasons that keep you alive after you have already died once. From the beginning, I brought them to the workshop. I learned the language of their hands. Ethan liked the heft of things. He would hold a mallet the way a small king holds a scepter, not to rule with, but to understand the balance of it. Mia preferred lines that met cleanly. I would hand her a square to check my corners, and she would nod solemnly when they pleased her and purse her lips when they did not. Little Ava was sound. She would flick a board with her finger and tilt her head to hear the note, and she was almost always right about whether it wanted to be a shelf or a boat or a birdhouse. That is how I think of them still. Heft, measure, and music, at problems that lived inside screen. None of that made him less good. Goodness has always been the foundation layer in Daniel. It carries everything else, even when the house above it changes. The house did change. He married Tara, and I will tell you something I rarely admit out loud. The day I met her, I understood at once why men build skylights, and buy better glassware, and start fussing with the angle of the dining chairs before company arrives. Beauty can be a complicated promise. Tara was all the things a magazine cover might be in December. She wore a red scarf that could have been chosen by a committee and a smile that knew exactly where to plant itself. If she had rough years, she kept them well dusted. I do not say this to be unkind. We all arrange our stories. Some of us arranged them with the lights turned up. From the start, Tara had a hunger for brightness. She knew which coffee shop made snowflake patterns in foam, and which photographer made family eyes look like they were underlined. She loved December the way a stage loves a spotlight. I found it charming mostly. There is no sin in wanting your life to sparkle. I wanted that for her because Daniel wanted it for her. And because when I looked at those 3 children, I thought if sparkle is what keeps wind out of these rooms, then shine every surface twice. There are ways to keep a house shining that do not show on camera. I learned them while Elaine was sick, and our bank account was a list of quiet negotiations. I learned them again when Daniel and Tara bought their place on Larkspur Lane, and the furnace coughed a sad little cough the first week of January. The rebate, I discovered that winter had my name on it and nobody else's, but they never had to know that. The mortgage adjustment that followed an unexpected escrow shortfall spring after spring was simply a phone call and a walk to the credit union, then a walk home with a heavier envelope than I could reasonably pretend not to be carrying. The Tahoe transmission failure, the summer camp deposit, the orthodontist bill, the emergency vet visit for a dog too good to have trapped his paw in the screen door. I am not a saint. I am a man with a steady back and a boy I love and grandchildren whose footsteps on my porch sounded like a future. I did not call any of it sacrifice. Sacrifice is a word I reserve for people who bleed in public. I called it rebalancing, the way a level settles when you tap it. My father taught me that on nights when the town was thinner and colder, and we took ladders to houses where old men had fallen asleep by windows trying to remember what their wives smelled like, he would fix the draft and leave a note that said keep warm, then put the bill in his pocket and write a different one later that would not startle a widow's eyes. He told me we do what we can so people can do what they must. That is how I understood my money when I slid it across counters. It would be foolish to pretend it did not matter. It mattered enough that I kept my name out of it whenever I could. If you live in a small American town long enough, you know the exact hour the first string of lights goes up. It is not a random Tuesday. It happens when the high school chorus director sighs after the first rehearsal and says we might yet have a concert, and when the bakery pulls its first tray of sugar cookies out at dawn and frost steam curls in the glass. That was the week I began this story, without knowing I was beginning it. I started building the gifts in the same spirit as always, which is to say, with a map of their hands in my head. For Ethan, now 16 and taller than anyone has a right to be at that age, I made a long briefcase with brass latches that click like confidence when you close them. Inside I carved her initials, so lightly she might not notice at first, but will be grateful for one night when she needs to remember who she is. For Ava, 13, and still able to hear the note a room is making, I built a music box from cherrywood, the grain like a river. I taught the teeth to sing a tune. I wrote the winter Elaine's hair began to fall. It is a simple tune. It sounds like a bird teaching the morning how to begin again, and I like to imagine it would find the space between Ava's thoughts and settle there. I bought a few store gifts too, because there is no virtue in refusing a child the exact pair of shoes that makes running feel like flight. The man at the shop helped me navigate the difference between models whose names sounded like air compressors. I nodded as if I understood and bought the ones that made his tone turn satisfied. I ordered headphones that promised to cancel the noise of the world so the right noise could come through. I found the photography book Mia had pointed to once on a museum field trip, the edition with paper that drank the ink instead of reflecting the viewer back at herself. None of it was lavish. All of it required me to say yes to overtime at the yard and no to a chair I have been telling myself I will replace since 2019. The square lit up 2 nights before Christmas Eve. The gazebo took its usual halo of paper lanterns that sway as if they are anxious and delighted all at once. a retired man I know dressed as a shepherd and complained cheerfully about the wool. Children licked peppermint sticks that left red borders on their teeth. I watched from the edge with my hands in my pockets, learning again how to feel both happy and lonesome inside the same breath. I suppose that is winter's secret. It teaches you how to hold contradictions without letting them fight. I was in the workshop the following afternoon when it began to snow in earnest. The radio found a piano carol, and the world narrowed to the circle of light on my bench. I tied the ribbon on Ava's music box and practiced opening it the way I would in front of her, casually, like I hadn't stayed up late to make sure the lid closed perfect and the gear caught without complaint. The phone buzzed. I didn't hear it at first. Then I did. It had that particular insistence a phone has when it carries a truth and doesn't know how to warn you to sit down. It was a text from Ethan. He rarely texts during the day. When he does, it is to send a video of someone landing a ridiculous trick or a photo of a sky he thinks I should see because clouds made a face. This was only words. "Grandpa, can you call me?" I called so quickly I hit speaker by accident. His voice came through too big, then smaller when I took it off, and held the phone like you hold a small bird you want to calm. He asked about the truck's exhaust rattle first, and then he said there's this thing, and then he went quiet in the exact way boys do when they have been asked to carry an adult's burden across a thin bridge. I said, "Take your time." He took it. Then he said, "Mom said you shouldn't bring gifts this year." I stood still enough to hear the clock on the wall count its heartbeats. The fan hummed, indifferent. A snowflake, just one, pressed its wet star against the window and slid down like a finger. I did not speak because I wanted to give him time to say more if he needed to. He cleared his throat, doing the brave thing, the repeat what you heard thing that teenagers perform when they love two sides of the same family and need to place one sentence carefully where it will not break anything that can still be mended. Felt far from me, and I heard my own voice say, "Ah, I see," in the tone an older man uses when he is trying to move something heavy without waking a sleeping child. Ethan inhaled in a way that told me the rest of his sentence had legs and was running to catch up. She didn't want me to say it like that. She wanted me to say, "We are doing things different this year." But then Mia said if I say it soft it still means the same thing, and she didn't want me to be the messenger. But then I was the one with your number, and... "It's all right," I said. "You did right calling me." I could hear the house around him. The dryer knocking a coin someone forgot in a pocket. Someone walking down a hallway with hurry in their step. The dog sigh that always sounds like resignation and hope mixed together. "We can still see you," he said fast. "I mean, I want to. We want to. It's just the gift part." She says we'll do a celebration later, like a family-only thing. "All right," I said again. My mouth has a way of saying all right when my chest is a man knocking at a door and finding no one home. You tell your sisters I love them. Tell them Grandpa's got a few things to finish in the workshop and that I'll call later and we'll figure out a time. "We can come to you," he said, stumbling over the generosity, and I knew he meant it. He would have trudged through snow to stand in my doorway and tell me a joke about socks just to see if it could pull my mouth into a smile. Teenagers surprise you that way. They are capable of sudden tenderness when adults are busy polishing their armor. "We'll talk," I said. "Thank you for calling me, Ethan. I mean that. Thank you." When I ended the call, the radio was still playing that piano carol, and the room was still exactly the same except for the invisible rearrangement that happens when a sentence lands and unpacks its suitcase. I stood with my hands on the bench and let the silence show me where it hurt. Then I picked up the longboard and turned it over and felt the compass rose with my palm. North is north, I said out loud to a room that did not require me to explain what I meant. I want to tell you I got angry right then, that I slammed a drawer or hurled a rag at the wall, and exclaimed a word a gentleman of my age is only supposed to say when a hammer meets a thumb. But anger is not how grief first comes to a man who has spent his life moving breakable things. Grief arrives like a careful clerk. It sets down a folder and opens it and shows you a receipt you do not remember signing. And by the time you have read the date, you recognize the handwriting. It would be easy to draw Tara in sharp lines here, to tell you her edges and leave out her warmth. The truth is I have seen her tuck Ava's hair behind her ear in a way that could teach the moon something about gentleness. I have watched her defend Mia's drawings when a teacher suggested the world prefers flowers that look like flowers. I have heard her laugh with Ethan in a kitchen at midnight over burned popcorn, the kind of laugh that turns a house back into a home. I know those things, and I hold them. I also know that image can hunger. I know what it costs, in money and in mercy, to feed a life that wants to be admired for being admirable. I know because I have been paying parts of that cost privately, balancing ledgers on napkins no one else sees. There was a time when that made me proud in the quiet way a man is proud to keep rain out of a room where children sleep. Standing there in the workshop, looking at the gifts my hands had made, I felt something shift. Not rage. Not yet. I thought of the night Elaine taught me how to fold grief so it fit in a pocket. She said carry it like a note you can take out when you need to remember who you are. Do not let anyone add words to it that are not yours. The world outside went on being lovely and indifferent. A neighbor shoveled. Somewhere a siren wailed, and then faded the way sirens do when something has turned out all right after all. On the square, I knew, the paper lanterns would be knocking their foreheads together and laughing at how ridiculous it was to be afraid of wind. I set the music box down and walked to the window and stood there as if the snow had come to visit me. I let it. Christmas has always been a doorway. We pretend it is a day. It is not. It is a hinge we pass through, and some of us notice the creak and some of us do not. That afternoon, in a room that smelled like pine and lemon oil and the ghost of my wife's hair, I heard the hinge for the first time in a long while. It made a sound like a truth deciding to speak. I took a breath and put the longboard back where it belonged and turned off the radio and washed my hands because my father taught me you wash your hands before you touch a difficult thing. I dried them on the shop rag and folded the rag into squares. I thought of the hundreds of small rescues that had led me to this moment and how I had never asked any of them to announce themselves. I thought of Ethan's voice telling me poor people gifts, and how each word had tried to soften itself and failed at the attempt. I do not know how long I stood there. Long enough for the snow to change its mind and fall harder. Long enough for the workshop to forget which hour it was. When the clock finally reminded me, it did so gently. I picked up my coat and walked to the blue door that needs paint and stepped into the cold and listened to the world without asking it to apologize. The town sounded the same as it had that morning. A wreath sighed on its hinge. Far away, a train told the river a story. Somewhere a furnace came on and answered a question none of us say out loud in winter. Will we be warm enough? I did not have an answer yet. I knew only that a sentence had been spoken, and that I had heard it, and that the gifts on my bench were not the only things I would be wrapping that season. The phone buzzed again in my pocket. A second message from Ethan arrived, just 4 words. I'm sorry, Grandpa. Sorry. I typed back the truth I had to hold right then, or I would drop it later when it mattered more. I know, son. I know. Then I put the phone away and walked toward the square where the lanterns were pretending not to be afraid, and I realized that a man can be both the one who lights them and the wind that makes them tremble. I had been the first long enough. The second was coming, and Christmas, being the doorway it is, waited patiently while I learned which side I stood on. That is how the story begins, with a town speaking softly, and a boy doing the brave thing, and a sentence that changes the shape of your hands. Poor people gifts embarrass her. You would think words like that would turn to ice on their way through a winter afternoon. They do not. They burn. And if you are a grandfather who has spent a lifetime keeping quiet, so love can move through rooms without tripping over you. You feel the flame and do not blow it out. Not yet. After the call, the workshop stayed exactly as it had been. The radio murmured its carol. The fan kept its small weather going over the bench, and the ribbon from Ava's music box lay in a tidy S, like the first letter of sorry. I stood and waited for the first surge of anger to arrive, but anger did not come. What came was heat. Not heat you can see. A stranger would be coming to inspect it. I have learned that humiliation prefers a neat room. It wants every surface cleared so it can sit where it pleases and make itself at home. Each tool found its hook. Each shaving of walnut and ash found the bin. I washed the glasses I barely needed for close work and dried them until the towel looked useful. I heard my father say, as he always did after a hard job, "Put your house back in order." He meant the workshop then. I think he meant the heart too. There are days when the town tells you what to feel. This was not one of them. On Sycamore Street the neighbor's wreath sighed again on its hinge, and a boy biked past with his hood up, singing to no one. I could have gone to the diner. The counter would have been crowded with men who talk, whether like it is a beloved dog they cannot train. Patty would have refilled my coffee before I asked. I did not want to see anyone who would say "How are you?" in the honest way, and give me space to answer. I stayed where the lemon oil still remembered my hands. I kept moving until the motion felt like thought. I wrapped the longboard in brown paper the way I always do, plain on the outside, so the surprise has somewhere to live. I folded the easel into its case and polished the brass, as if approval were a finish you could rub into metal. I closed the lid on the music box and listened to the click of the latch. There are clicks that say finished and clicks that say it is finished with you. I could not tell which this was yet. The first flashback came not as a picture, but as a smell. The sharp sweetness of peppermint snapped the air in two, and I was in a December when Daniel was 10 and had decided we could be rich if we sold candy canes door to door. We sourced them from the pharmacy, where the owner liked to make me laugh by insisting on calling me young fella. We made a sign on a torn cardboard lid, and Daniel wrote Candy Kings by mistake, and then insisted it was better that way. We sold 3 boxes, mostly because neighbors found it impossible to refuse a boy who believed in the math of his own idea. That night, Elaine kissed the top of his head while he counted dollars, and looked up at me as if to say, "This is what you built." And I nodded as if to say it is what we built. And the peppermint rode the heat through the house like a holiday we could afford. Memory has a cruel sense of humor when you are nursing a private hurt. Every smell was a page torn from a book I loved. Butter browning in a pan at a house I passed brought back the year we failed to make fudge and ended up with a bowl of something that could have been used as mortar if we had a wall that needed fixing. Cinnamon from the bakery door carried the picture of Elaine's scarf catching a dusting of sugar when she bent to tie Mia's shoe. I walked past all of it like a man on a tour of a museum he once owned. The phone stayed quiet for a while. I did not expect Daniel to call. He is a good man who has learned to travel through difficult rooms by keeping his eyes on the far door. When the screen finally lit, it was a message I knew without reading. "Love you, Dad. We will do something after the rush." There was a picture attached. The tree at their place, perfect in the way a catalog teaches trees to behave, lights in even intervals. Gifts below, in paper, that could have paid one of their bills. I looked at that photograph long enough to find a flaw. There is always a flaw. In the corner, barely visible, the dog's toy duck lay on its side. One I'm missing. Stuffing pushing through like the truth. It is a strange comfort to a humiliated man that imperfection insists on its. Hearing Elaine say carry it folded, not spread out. Once I woke, because in the dream I had tried to gift a coat to a man in a snowstorm, and he refused it, not out of pride, but because the coat was not the brand that matched his life. Morning came with a sky the color of tin. The town moved with its usual winter decency. The hardware store opened early. The bakery apologized to no one when it filled the street with its miracle. At the lumberyard, I signed out overtime with the same initials I have used for 30 years. My hands found their rhythm without consulting me. The men at the yard are kind in the way men are when kindness requires no words. No one asked about my Christmas plans. No one told jokes they could see would bounce off a wall and land wrong. We loaded 2x4s, and I let the scrape of boards on the truck bed arrange my thoughts into stacks. Around noon, Marty from the plow service waved me over in the lot. He had that look people get when they are excited on your behalf. Heard your grandkids are in the church pageant tonight, he said. Me as an angel, right? His voice made it sound like a promotion. I opened my mouth and something dignified came out. That's right, I said. They will be lovely. It cost me a small honesty to say it, so I did not offer more. He slapped the side of the truck and said, bring your camera. And then he was gone, leaving behind the imprint of a conversation that had not belonged to either of us. There are tiny humiliations that do not look like anything from the outside. Seeing your reflection in a storefront and noticing your shoulders have been standing lower than usual. Listening to a car pull into a driveway nearby and waiting for a door to slam because you expect someone who needs you. Realizing you have walked the long way around the square to avoid passing a window where family portraits are displayed for pickup. I spent that day collecting them like dull coins. By the time I reached the workshop again, I had a pocket full of weight I could not spend. I did what I have always done when a problem arrives that I cannot outwork. I cleaned. I sharpened the chisels to a degree that would have made my father smile. I wiped down the shelves until the grain showed its age rings like a secret I was allowed to keep. I sorted the jar of old screws into little boxes and wrote labels in a hand steadier than I felt. Elaine used to tease me that I made order the way some men make speeches. She was not wrong. When the world refuses to say the thing that must be said, placing a line of brass latches in a straight row can feel like a reply. Twilight brought the pageant. The church's white clapboards accepted the evening like a compliment. Families bundled in, cheeks red above scarves, each carrying the accomplishment of arriving on time like a private medal. I walked the long way home instead. I thought about going in, about sitting in the back pew, and letting the old hymns remind me that what I am is part of a larger we. The humiliation said, do not put your living body in a room where you are not wanted. And the part of me that has learned to listen to such warnings obeyed. So I passed the church and kept my hands in my pockets and watched my breath make small ghosts. I stopped by the square and picked up a paper cup of cocoa I did not drink. The gazebo lanterns shook their heads no to some joke the wind was trying. A girl I did not know almost ran into me and said sorry sir with a sincerity that made me want to sit down on the steps and stay there until the town reset itself. I went home instead and ate soup and pretended it did not taste like waiting around the longboard again and took it off again because the knot looked too cheerful. When the clock slid past 9, I put on my coat and walked to the porch and stood under a sky that had decided to be clear so the stars could pretend to be forgiving. A message arrived from Ava then. It was not words, only a photo of a snowflake that had landed on her glove, its geometry absurd and perfect. She has always known how to speak without injuring. I stared at that tiny miracle until my eyes burned. I typed back beautiful, and then I deleted it, and then I typed again because there are some sentences that refuse to improve. Christmas morning came in quiet boots. I made coffee and drank it from the chipped mug Elaine had once declared too homely to throw away. I sliced an apple and let the knife do the talking. I put a small roast in the oven, not because I was hungry, but because cooking something that takes hours can make a day behave properly. While it browned, I took a slow tour of my house, room to room, like a man taking inventory after a storm that only he had felt. The rocking chair I recaned for Elaine sat with its brick of sunshine from the window. The framed photograph of my father and his first ladder kept its patient counsel. The row of wooden houses on the mantel leaned just enough to prove a hand had made them. The phone buzzed and I knew the sound of Daniel's text before I saw it. "Merry Christmas, Dad. We'll call later. We love you." I pictured the room into which that message was sent. I saw Tara in her immaculate sweater, the way she arranges tissue paper in a bag so that it bursts like a flower. I saw Ethan trying to manufacture noise because holidays make him nervous. I saw Mia's attention on a camera angle, attempting to document without erasing herself. I saw Ava, fingers on a ribbon, hearing the pitch of joy and trying to find her note within it. I was not in that room. I was in mine, and I decided that this fact would be allowed to exist without an argument about why. I took my plate to the table at noon and ate slowly. The roast did its best to be tender. The potatoes apologized for overboiling. I salted the carrots twice because sometimes two small kindnesses can stand in for the one you were denied. After the dishes, I put on my coat and hat and walked out into a town still sticky with a hush that follows torn paper and squeals. The streets wore tire tracks that told stories if you wanted to read them. A minivan had paused in front of the Wilcox place, backed up, then reconsidered and parked anyway. The old oak near elm had caught another child's scarf and held it like a flag. I noted all of it the way men like me note the world, gently, as if my approval were something the day might enjoy. I did not plan to pass Larkspur Lane, but my feet have their own habits. I turned the corner and there it was, the house I have helped stand up more than once, wearing its wealth like a grin. The tree showed in the front window just enough to declare mood. Through the glass, I could see silhouettes move, the quick shapes of teenagers and the slower shapes of adults trying to manage teenagers. I heard the kind of laughter that belongs decisively to the people who are making it. I stood across the street, not because I wanted anything, but because stopping felt more honest than walking past while pretending not to notice. I do not know how long I watched. Long enough for the front door to open and a delivery boy to step back with a basket trimmed in holly. Long enough for the dog to appear at the window and thump his tail against an idea he and I still shared. Long enough for me to understand that their day was proceeding without me and would not be improved by my same patient refusal to explain itself. A woman I know from years ago called my name, Jonathan. She had a pie in each hand and the nervous energy of someone carrying more than baked goods. We exchanged the seasonal liturgy. "Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas." She asked whether I would be at the community dinner that evening. I said maybe, the polite lie that buys time. She touched my arm, and her eyes did that quick searching thing a person's eyes do when they have heard a whisper, but do not trust it. "You all right?" I said of course, and made my mouth do the work of trimming the sentence into something harmless. She accepted the answer the way people accept the weather. I admired her for letting me keep my privacy. At home, I sat in the workshop because the living room had too much past in it. I opened the music box, but did not wind it. I ran my finger along the edge of the longboard paper and lifted just enough to see the compass rose. I clicked the easel latches once and set them down. Then I took the kitchen chair I have not replaced since 2019 and carried it to the bench and sat and spread a pad of paper in front of me. I wrote a list. Not a plan. Not yet. A list of the quiet things that had held up that house on Larkspur Lane for the past years. The furnace rebate with my name on it. The mortgage differences covered in cash I folded twice before handing to a teller who called me sir and then dropped the honorific when he saw the account number. The Tahoe transmission. The orthodontist. The summer camp deposit. The emergency vet. The donations to the fundraiser that had not raised enough. The holiday bonuses I had slipped to Daniel with a joke about the lumberyard's generosity. I wrote each item as if I were recording measurements for a complex build. Dollar figures when I remembered them. Dates if I could approximate them. I did not add it up. Numbers can be a cruelty when you are already nursing another. I only needed to see the shape of what I had quietly been. When I finished, I slid the paper into a folder and laid the pencil across it like a closing benediction. My hands shook not from rage, but from recognition. Humiliation has a way of teaching you the exact dimensions of your giving. The afternoon thinned. The silence grew thoughtful instead of empty. I made tea because that is what Elaine would have ordered from the world. I drank it standing, the way you drink a hall pass. The phone vibrated. A video appeared without a caption. Ethan had sent it. It showed the dog finally conquering the new squeaky toy and parading it like a trophy. You could hear laughter off camera, a bright, generous sound. The frame wobbled and then steadied on the dog's face as he looked into the lens with the expression animals get when they are certain they are loved. I felt the hot sting again, and then something else behind it, something cooler. Even in a room where I was not allowed, the boy had gone to the trouble to open a small door and wave. I sent back a still from the video of the dog mid-prance. Champ, I wrote. Champion. Ethan replied with a single heart, then another, then nothing. It was enough. Mia sent a photo a few minutes later of a charcoal sketch she had made of the tree from beneath, branches like black rivers against the white. She did not say it was for me. She did not need to. Ava's snowflake remained on my phone, the geometry of forgiveness and refusal plotted in ice. Dusk came early and stood around the house with its hands in its pockets. I put on my coat and went out to the porch particular, and it sounded like a prayer that did not require an answer. Night folded the town into itself. Across the way, someone set off a small firework, a half-hearted star that died with a sigh. I could have turned on the television. I could have found an old movie that would have let me cry at the right times for the wrong reasons. Instead, I went inside and took the folder from the bench and placed it in the drawer where I keep deeds and birth certificates, and the letter Elaine wrote me in a hand that had not yet become uncertain. I closed the drawer and felt the click that means this is not gone, only contained. When humiliation simmers long enough under a calm lid, it becomes a broth of clarity. You taste it and recognize ingredients you did not know you had added. Pride, love, tenderness, a little foolishness that you do not resent because it came from hope. I went to bed with that taste in my mouth and slept the sleep of men who have decided not to forgive yet, but also decided not to become cruel. It is a narrow hallway. I walked it. In the morning, the town began again. Trucks coughed awake. The plows made their dutiful passes. Somewhere a child cried in a way that meant the toy had broken, and then the crying stopped in a way that meant someone had said we can fix that. I made eggs and burned the toast because old habits insist on being noticed. Then I dressed and put on my boots and drove to the hardware store because grief and humiliation and holidays and all the rest make no difference to a furnace filter when it has decided to be replaced. On the way, I passed the square. 2 teenagers I did not know were taking photos in front of the gazebo, pretending to be colder than they were for the sake of a pose. An old couple held hands like a pact. The woman saw me and waved with the frank generosity of someone who remembers a lane. I parked and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. The radio talk show murmured something about resolutions. I turned it off. No talk of beginnings yet. Not while the ending is still in the room. Inside the store, I found the filter and the oil for the snowblower and the little rubber caps for chair feet, so they stopped telling the floor their complaints. I paid in cash because sometimes I like the conversation paper money has with the counter. The clerk, a young man with hair that refused to obey, thanked me with the sincerity of someone new to employment in December. As I turned to go, a display caught my eye. Blank record books in a neat stack, the kind with strong spines and lines that do not bleed. I picked one up and felt its weight. It was nothing. It was possibility. I bought it. Back in the workshop, I opened to the first page and wrote a single sentence at the top. Not prose. Not poetry. A carpenter's line. Things built without credit. I closed the cover and laid it next to the folder. Then I stood a long time, listening to the fan, the small weather above my bench, and I realized the storm inside me had changed. Not blown through. Not even reached its roar. It had clarified. The humiliation had done its cooking. I could feel the surface tighten, the lid begin to rattle. Not yet, I told myself. Not out of fear. Out of respect for timing. I walked to the window. Snow had begun again, light as the dust from sanding cedar. Across the yard, the blue door waited without complaint. For the first time since the call, I smiled. A narrow, private smile. A man had left a mark. The shape of that mark would show itself soon enough. For the moment, I kept the room neat. I put the tools away. I wound the music box and let it play, not for an audience, but for the wood and the air and the lemon oil and the memory of a woman who taught me the difference between retaliation and repair. The tune sounded like a bird teaching the morning to begin again. I let it finish. Then I turned off the light and let the workshop find its dark. Outside, the town exhaled another ordinary day. Inside me, something stepped to the front of the line and raised its hand. I would not call it anger. I would not call it grief. I would not even call it resolve yet. It was the moment a kettle decides it is time to speak. And I understood, in that small ringing space between silence and sound, that I had been quiet long enough. The days after Christmas fell into that strange, quiet rhythm the town knows so well. Decorations lingered in windows like guests who didn't get the hint to leave. The sidewalks were salted into a patchwork of white scabs, and the air carried that brittle calm that comes when a storm has finished making its point. I moved through it like a man who has returned to a house where someone shifted all the furniture by an inch. Everything was technically in place, but nothing fit the way it used to. Routine has always been my refuge. I swept the workshop every morning, even when it didn't need it. I oiled hinges that weren't squeaking yet. I checked the truck's fluids, replaced a furnace filter, tightened a banister for Mrs. Keller down the street, who always paid me in pumpkin bread I didn't have the heart to refuse. Outwardly, nothing about me had changed. Inwardly, it was as if a line had been drawn somewhere I couldn't see but could feel under my feet. People in town have a way of offering sympathy without knowing they're doing it. At the diner, Patty poured my coffee and said "Quiet Christmas" with that half question that's more about giving you a chance to lie than asking for the truth. I smiled and said "peaceful," because peaceful sounds like a choice, while quiet sounds like something that happened to you. She nodded, satisfied, and moved on to the next pot. I noticed things I used to ignore. How the sound of Ethan's text tone still saved in my phone seemed to echo in rooms where no messages came. How the square's gazebo lights were starting to burn out one by one, tiny failures that only someone looking too closely would see. How, when I passed by Larkspur Lane one evening on my way back from the lumberyard, Tara's SUV was parked in the driveway, spotless as always, but the side mirror I had once replaced for them bore a faint scratch she'd probably never noticed. That mirror had been her panic call 2 winters ago, after she backed into a mailbox. I'd fixed it without saying a word to Daniel, because pride is a fragile thing in a household built on image. That kind of noticing is dangerous for a man like me. I have spent my life smoothing rough edges so other people wouldn't get splinters. But when your eyes adjust to humiliation, you start seeing the edges that have been cutting you all along. The workshop became my listening room. I would sit there in the evenings with the music box unwound, the tools hung like punctuation marks around me, and I'd let silence show me where it wanted to settle. Elaine used to say winter has a voice if you're patient. She was right. It speaks in little creaks and shifts, the way wood remembers its shape after a hard freeze. I listened to that, and to my own breathing, and I realized I wasn't mourning anymore. Mourning implies something is lost. The drive is quiet, just rolling hills, bare trees, and the occasional hawk perched like punctuation on fence posts. I've always liked that road. It gives you space to think without asking you to solve anything. Halfway there, I caught myself rehearsing conversations that would never happen. Imaginary scenes where Daniel would sit across from me and say, "Dad, I didn't know how much you did." Or Tara would soften, admit embarrassment got the better of her. In every version, I smiled and forgave. But each scenario felt more like a script than a possibility. It wasn't bitterness. It was the simple realization that those conversations required a kind of honesty they had never practiced. That realization sat with me as I browsed the aisles, as I ran my fingers over sandpaper grits and varnished tins. It followed me home like a quiet passenger. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky was bruising into twilight, and a strange calm had taken hold. It wasn't resignation. It was the kind of calm you feel when you're tracing the grain of wood and realize where the cut will need to go. In early January, Daniel stopped by the house alone. He brought a box of leftover cookies, Tara's way of keeping gestures clean and distant. He looked tired, the way men look when they're juggling more plates than they want to admit. We talked about work, the cold snap, a new neighbor on the street who had strung up lights shaped like flamingos. Neither of us mentioned Christmas. When he was leaving, he paused in the doorway, hands in his jacket pockets. "I've been meaning to thank you," he said, "for all the help over the years. I don't say it enough." It was a decent thing to say, a son thing. But he said it with the softness of someone closing a door gently so it wouldn't make a sound not opening one. I nodded. "You're welcome, son." And that was that. After he left, I stood at the window watching his taillights disappear down Sycamore. Something about the exchange stuck to my ribs. It wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't know he was standing on when he said it. The life he walked back to was built on beams I had laid quietly, boards I had nailed when no one else was around. He thanked me for help, as if I'd loaned him a hammer one afternoon. Not for holding up the roof over his family's head more times than he could count. That night, I pulled out the folder from the drawer where I had tucked it away. The list I'd made on Christmas night things built without credit. I spread it on the workbench. The handwriting looked foreign now, like a man confessing something to himself. I traced each line with my finger, slow, deliberate. Each entry wasn't just a transaction. It was a moment I had chosen to remain invisible. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I'd never dared before. What would happen if invisibility ended? I didn't answer right away. I let the question sit in the cold air of the workshop. Somewhere outside, a plow passed by, scraping ice from a road with the steady authority of someone who knows exactly where they're going. In those quiet January days, something inside me sharpened. Not into anger, but into focus. Every routine I performed, every nail sorted, every board stacked felt like drawing blueprints for a house that hadn't been built yet. And though I couldn't name it at the time, I knew. The line had been drawn. It happened on a Tuesday, one of those January days where the air feels like it's holding its breath. The snow hadn't fallen in a week, so the ground was crusted and gray, like the town had worn its holiday clothes too long and was embarrassed to take them off. I was clearing space in the back room, recognize it. Then I saw the return address, the bank. Not mine, theirs. I sat down at the workbench, peeled the flap open carefully, and pulled out a statement. It was for Daniel and Tara's mortgage. I had signed a refinancing guarantee for them 4 years ago. It wasn't a cosign, exactly just a silent safety net that would reassure the bank. They told me it was routine, nothing would ever come of it, and I'd believe them because I wanted to. The letter in my hands was dated December 14th, just before Christmas. It was a notice of escrow adjustment. Their taxes had increased. Their payment had risen. And the difference had been quietly withdrawn from an auxiliary account under my name. An automatic draft I'd signed up for long ago when we'd set it all up just in case. I flipped the pages, scanning the lines like a carpenter running his hand over a warped plank. They hadn't said a word. Not Daniel. Not Tara. Not even a passing mention over coffee. They'd let the draft pull from my account, silently, as though it were a law of nature rather than a choice. And then a week later, Tara told my grandson that my poor people gifts embarrassed her. I didn't shout. I didn't slam anything. I just sat there for a long time, listening to the way the house held the quiet. A small draft slipped in from the kitchen window I'd been meaning to fix. The clock ticked. The radio wasn't on. I could hear my own breathing. There's a sound the world makes when it realizes you're finally paying attention. That was the sound in the room. I reached for the folder, laid the statement on top, looked at the list I had made on Christmas night, every quiet contribution, every unseen repair, every time I chose silence so someone else could keep their story spotless. And for the first time, it wasn't a list of generosity. It was a blueprint of how thoroughly I had erased myself from the narrative of my own giving. World to know yet. It was, for me, a line had been crossed. I had found the rotten beam behind the paint. And now, I was the only one who knew exactly where to place the chisel. The house creaked that night as the temperature dropped. Usually, that sound feels like memory. This time, it sounded like agreement.